So welcome to the Node.js Technical Steering Committee meeting for October 16th, 2019. We're going to follow our standard agenda, which was as marked in issue 766. To start out with, does anybody have any announcements that they'd like to share?
Yeah, last week, the ANT project was announced as joining the OpenJS Foundation's incubation program. This means that they've gone through the silent period. The CPC has reviewed their application and there's no glaring issues, and they're going to work through our onboarding checklist. It's pretty exciting. I think it's, like I obviously have a bias as a Google employee, but I think that it is a great move for the AMP project. And I think it will help us, bring more members and, get more coverage of the foundation as a whole and help us grow.
Yeah, I guess it's another large project, which is should bring more people participating across the board. I guess the other thing to mention, if I'm not sure it was called out specifically in past meetings, but NVM was also in the same category. So just for awareness, if people weren't already aware.
And more projects keep coming in. So it's really great seeing here.
People should test with the 13.0.0 RCs that Beth has been cutting.
Okay, so that was Rich, right?
Yeah, I think Beth.
Sorry, you're not coming through very well, Rich. I guess while we wait to see if he manages to connect back up. 13.x is slated to go out. I forget the exact date off the top of my head, but this month, fairly soon. Bethany's been cutting release candidates, and it would be very helpful for people to be testing with those release candidates and giving us feedback in advance of the formal release of that new version.
The release expected next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday, okay. And go ahead.
I just want to say thank you, Beth, for pushing that forward. No, I know how much this is involved in. Really appreciate it.
I guess along that that same vein, it's also good to let people know that 12.x is also going LTS. So if you're sticking to the LTS releases, it's the latest one that you can start to consider, and that will be LTS quite soon as well. Any other announcements?
A quick one from me. There is the Collaborator Summit is happening, and at Node Interactive. So you should send your sessions so that you can come and speak and collaborate at the summit and book in your flights and so on using the travel fund. That's just that.
Right, I'm just taking 2 notes. Travel fund is available. Call for topics open.
And just as a heads up, for NodeConf EU coming up in just about a month, we will be having a small code and learn. The conference is pretty small, no more than about 300 people. I only expect maybe about 100 to be involved in the code and learn, so it shouldn't be too many people coming in, but just let us know.
Okay, Matteo, on the Collaborator Summit, I guess calls are open, but there's no fixed end date or deadline, is there?
No, there's no deadline, but as soon as possible.
Okay, no. Help organizers. Okay, any other announcements? Okay, if not, let's move on to the next item on the agenda, which is CPC and board meeting updates. Matteo, do you want to give a CPC update?
I didn't join last meeting. So Michael, can you please,
Sure.
if you can give it yourself, because I didn't join.
Yeah, I think, so go ahead.
The biggest news are the project starting and coming in. So there's a lot of activity on the private repository, on the private mailing list and so on. And that the work of the CPC continue. And right now, the major work is on making sure that the project are onboarded in the best possible way.
Yeah, I think as Matteo said, that's where lots of the activity is. We're getting applications, which is great. Some have been announced, which is good. Other work is really around documenting and clarifying that process. As the first people come through, we have some PRs to help add more detail to, how we go through the process, how we, in the silent period, how does that work? What kind of checklist should we be following? There are other things which we've already, everybody should be aware, but I'll mention just because they're, nearing landing, are the travel fund moving to the OpenJS organization, and the code of conduct process, how we'll handle it internally. I have to double check, but that's going to be landed soon. And then finally, some updates, as we were talking about, to the project progression. Otherwise, there is some discussion on infrastructure for the OpenJS Foundation. So if you have an interest on that level, there's certainly opportunity to get involved, as well as there's work on standards. So the standards group is meeting regularly. So if you have an interest there, you can get involved. And I guess finally, just the reminder that, that everybody is welcome to join the CPC. If you have an interest in that, we definitely invite you to come and participate. Any member of the projects, including all the members of the OpenJS of the Node.js project, are free to self-nominate as a regular member and get fully involved.
I think we should move on to agenda items at this point.
Okay, Rich, did you want to say anything more beyond? I know you were cut off.
No, it's fine.
Nope.
I was just asking Beth to weigh in, but she did, and yeah, let's keep this. Let's
Okay.
move along. Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the agenda items, which are the first ones under Node.js/Node. So the first one is 29936, stop managing CVEs. Sam added this to the agenda. So Sam, do you want to introduce this?
Yeah, we used to accept vulnerability reports and manage them in a private GitHub repo. So we needed to get CVEs for them, and we needed to ask ourselves. Now we're using HackerOne. We don't need to manage CVEs or ask for them anymore. So to my knowledge, we have no purpose to our CV process. It's just something that somebody's going to have to report on every year and get new ones and give back the old ones. So complete overhead. But James, you spoke up for them. So, I mean, I don't know if it's not a huge amount of work. I don't want to exaggerate it. It's just, I just don't see the purpose.
Yeah, really, it just comes down to just when we need to use it, right? Being able to do it directly without having to rely on a third party to actually issue those. And then the intent was also to be able to issue our own CVs on behalf of the ecosystem. So the work that the security working group is doing, I just don't know if they've actually made use of it.
It's actually separate. Like we would need to register as a different CNA to do that.
Okay. You point out that Sam, you pointed out, rightfully so, that we haven't issued this in a while, but that's a good thing. And it doesn't necessarily invalidate the process. We do need to get one. That said, the HackerOne process seems okay, right? Their approach to doing it seems good. And we also have the option of using GitHub as a CNA now. right? They are providing, offering services now. So I'm not going to block it. I would prefer not to have that reliance on a third party who's following processes that aren't necessarily open to us. Right. HackerOne is a commercial entity, and I'd rather not depend on them too much.
So I don't mind. I mean, we can leave it there until it's, until it's been completely unused for a year, and then maybe reconsider. I understand that kind of in the general, like, do we really want to rely on a commercial entity? But I mean, if GitHub kicks us off the platform, we're lost. So
Yeah.
I guess, but when you say unused for a year, I mean, I think it's either we're the CNA and we issue CVEs, or we ask HackerOne to do that. I'm not sure we can, like, I don't get the unused part, because if we have a CVE we need to do, am I thinking it wrong? Can we use HackerOne and our own assignment?
I was actually going to suggest something just like that, Michael. I don't know if this would be a conflict. I don't think it should be. But Sam, like, perhaps what could be a good thing to do is like go through the whole process of doing a CVE via HackerOne, go through the whole process of doing a CVE via GitHub, and just kind of comparing the experiences. My guess is being our own CNA has more upfront effort, but maybe a lower cost throughout. But if GitHub or HackerOne have, like a really great user experience from end to end, and we don't need to like, follow up on things, we just need to press a button, maybe that is preferable. But I think that, like, if we have you gone through the HackerOne CVE process at all?
I've observed the security working group getting CVEs for all of the vulnerabilities that are reported on HackerOne and that they stick in their Node database, but I haven't actually done it myself. I just watch the flow of CVEs into their database.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, go ahead.
So I don't know, maybe we should leave it around. I mean, there hasn't been a security release for a while. I think if we do another security release, again, these things are not predictable. We don't have any vulnerabilities. Who knows when we'll have them again? Then, and we go through that release and we go get all the CVEs from HackerOne. The last vulnerability release was a little unusual because, like James, as you know, all the CVEs were pre-allocated against HTTP2, so they were all, I mean, the vulnerabilities arrived with CVEs already. So anyhow, so yeah, I'm okay. Let's leave it. Let's do another security release and evaluate the process. And I'm personally not going to volunteer to go through like all the multiple steps of doing the CVEs just to see which one is hardest, like GitHub and then HackerOne and then our own personal.
That's probably more work than you'd have to do than just following the existing one, right?
Yeah.
The thing that struck me, my last comment would be, I think what was missing from the proposal of dropping it was enough. Like, I still think we need something that says, here's how we manage CVEs. It may be updated to say, we manage them through HackerOne. Here's how you request one. Here's how here's how the turnaround time you'd expect.
Well, yeah, fair enough. That would, okay. So when I update, or if I get around to updating our whatever documentation we have for interacting with HackerOne, that should be there. Okay.
Right.
I'm going to withdraw. I think from the feeling I'll just withdraw it. It's more trouble than it's worth right now. We'll do another security release, and after we've done it, we'll evaluate our CV process and whether we're happy with it or want to do any changes.
Yeah, I think that approach works. Yeah, and like I said in the comment, I'm definitely not going to block it. I do have that reluctance on relying on third party. If we go through the process and it seems like, hey, this is easier, it is better, that's fine. But but let's at least make sure we have a backup option, right? So if we're going to rely on the third party entity, let's have a backup choice just in case that doesn't work out long term.
James, just a question. Isn't just going straight to MITRE always a backup? I know it's not the best backup, but I just mean like.
Yeah, I meant a better backup.
Okay.
And that better backup would be we could use, HackerOne or GitHub, right?
Okay, so anything else to add to that before we move on? No, okay, the next issue is 23-162. Sorry, it's 29-592, which is to revert 23-162. Rich, you added this to the agenda?
Yeah, I did, but I think that Jeremiah, if he's here, probably has a better grip on it, and James, Anna, Mateo are all in favor. Are in favor of reverting, and Anatoly, Jeremiah, and Michael Zasso are, as far as I can tell, opposed, and that's kind of the crux of, you know, I think I haven't checked this morning to see if other people have weighed in, which might tip the balance. There's a bunch of people who use the emoji to indicate that they hadn't yet arrived at a decision and wanted to have this conversation. I'm personally like abstaining. I think either way is fine. I know which way I slightly prefer, but I don't really care enough to actually argue for it. But if we're going to get this reversion into 13, you know, we have to like make a decision like today or tomorrow, probably. So that's where that's at.
I'm also happy to provide context on my, well, I don't know if it's opposition really. I'm not convinced that the branching that's going to result by reverting it as a semver major is worth it. And I don't know if we can revert as a non-semver major, but so in theory, I'm in favor of reverting for whatever it's worth. But I don't like the idea of that there's going to be an LTS line that still has this behavior. So that's my objection here.
Is the behavior of this specified at all in the what working group spec for console?
No, that spec is very kind of browser specific and very underspecified for what we need.
Now, is this something that we could engage at what working group, try to specify behavior, and then if we find we're, you know, no longer compliant with the spec in various versions, then we could potentially fix it in LTS as a non-semver major if we're doing it for spec compliance? Or would this still be like considered semver major if we were fixing it for spec compliance?
Maybe longer term, it makes sense to have a conversation about that. But we just need to kind of figure out something for 13, right? We don't have time to go have that you know, the spec compliance and standards conversation. Or decision for 13.
I guess I'd ask, you know, is there a easy set of pros and cons to reverting versus not reverting? Like, are people, you know, do we expect that, you know, people are going to start complaining when 12 goes out? You know, or is it that they're going to get used to it and then complain when 13 comes out and it's different?
I don't know that a lot of people are really going to hit up against this, to be honest.
I'm not so sure about that. I mean, console.log is used by all kinds of tools all over the place to print things to their users. And if double quoted strings suddenly appear or disappear, that people might notice. If it was just literally going into log files, then yeah, no, it wouldn't be a big deal.
Yeah. So, you know, my challenge with this is just comes down to it. It really should have been a semver major.
It was, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. I think that was the.
Yeah, that's right. It was. It really. Yeah. I don't know. I guess I'm torn on it because I've actually seen these kind of changes like be very breaking. right, break entire tool chains. And it's
I
just,
don't think people are using symbols to the same extent.
yeah. I don't know, I'm torn on this one. I really am torn. So I would not consider my preference to revert to be wrong at all, because I am really torn on it. I like the change, but I don't like the breakage that can go along with these kind of changes.
I mean, it sounds like the sense of the room I'm getting is that people want to be conservative about things like this, and if that's the case, then we shouldn't land it.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean,
Remember, when did this land? Did it land in 11 before?
0. Landed in 12. It's only in 12.
So this is not a Semver policy break. Like it's a breaking major change. It landed for the first time in 12.0.0. People are noticing it now and starting to ask themselves, oh, wow, okay, it is major, but do we really want it to go into LTS? Which does put us in a weird place from Semver, because if we change it now, that is Semver major, so we're inside of 12.x, but it's before it went LTS. So there's a whole Semver majorness of it. But we haven't yet broken any rules. I guess the problem is more that I think people are asking themselves, do we really want this behavioral change? I guess it didn't get enough visibility or advertising when it landed.
Yeah.
Through nobody's fault. It just, it didn't get seen.
Yeah, that's the way our process is.
Yeah. Well, okay. Then, like I said, I'm torn on it. I've seen these kind of changes really break things, and I just, my preference is to be more conservative on it, but I'd have to say that reverting, is probably the wrong thing.
Because I don't think we're like this was talking about reverting in 13, not even in 12. So if it's still in 12,
even then, I mean, all right.
I'm just sort of like, maybe I'm coming to it from the, if it's going to be there in 12, reverting in 13 doesn't reduce the risk of people running into it, because they will. It's just introducing another change where they then say, well, now it's changed back.
Well, yeah, but it means that like eventually we get the uniform behave. We get, well, anyway, yeah.
Right. Like if you truly believe that it's the wrong behavior now, then
is there an option to switch it back? Is that an option? Instead of reverting, we just have a option for revert, for it in runtime reverting back to the original behavior?
I mean, that seems like overkill, but it's an option, sure.
I mean,
if we revert on 13, we could land an option on 12 to allow people to like run with that behavior. I'd be kind of surprised if people were augmenting the runtime for this very specific thing, personally.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to add that unless we actually got complaints from people and we're absolutely sure they would use it.
Yeah, I'm not even thinking necessarily about a command line flag or anything like that. We, just making sure we have an option on, or somebody could set a default console format option, a console.
So people who mark this issue as I'll decide after conversation include Colin and Tobias. I'm kind of interested in their take at this point.
I actually, while we were talking about it, went through and changed to do not revert. So my thinking is the whole flip-flopping. I think the behavior is what we want, but the whole going back and forth is unpleasant, and adding a flag is just more kind of maintenance overhead, I think.
Yeah, and I missed the first 20 minutes of the meetings, so I missed most of the discussion. In my opinion, adding a flag doesn't sound that reasonable. As you said, it seems like overkill for such a relatively simple issue.
How about Sam?
I think the current behavior, like the current 12.x behavior, is more consistent and better. It's only slightly better. I don't know if I would have approved the original PR if I'd actually paid attention, but given that it's a behavior now, we can't get it out of 12.x without doing something that really breaks our process. Flip-flopping doesn't seem like it's going to help anybody. I think we should stick with the current behavior in 12.x and not revert it for 13.x. Just keep on going with what we're doing.
I'm starting to land there also. I just cleared my my approval on the revert commit.
Can I suggest, it seems like we are not close to having consensus on this, and if we're not close to having consensus, then perhaps we should just go with the status quo, which is not reverting.
Well, why don't we ask this? Is there anybody on the call that thinks that we absolutely should revert this?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we do have consensus.
What I'm hearing is that we have people that don't want it reverted. We have people like myself who are really torn on it, but not enough to block. Do we have anybody that really wants it reverted?
I do want to give one more person. Girish also put down that he wanted more discussion, so I'm kind of just curious where he's at.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Unfortunately, I'm not able to make up my mind. I was hoping that I would get a better insight about the problem, but I still need some more time to, understand the actual background and the pros and cons of retaining it versus reverting it. So if you want a vote or an opinion right now, I don't have it, unfortunately.
And then, so the only person on the call who's also on the record in the issue tracker for being in favor of it is Matteo and arguably Anatoly. We already heard from Anatoly on this. I don't know if Matteo has moderated their opinion or if they still think we should revert or not. I think he said he was away from keyboard for a while. So yeah. Okay. So back to James's question. Sorry to take a little detour there, but yeah, is anybody in favor of reverting for 13? That was your question, right, James?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we should just status quo and Ruben can keep it open if he wants to, if he thinks this should happen, but it's going to require more time and conversation. It's not going to make it for 13.
And what were the reasons for proposing a revert of that? Because all the actual reasons that I see in the issue is that both members who approved that seem to be in favor of reverting it, but what are the actual reasons for the revert? Do you have a good reason for that?
The reason for the revert, basically the change in the output, basically, is from what I understand, was actually breaking it. Tyranny is the one that found it, presumably because it broke something he was working on. Now, I'm not aware of other specific people who have been broken by this specific change. These changes in console output, I have found just through experience to be surprisingly and unfortunately quite breaking because people do rejects on the output. And these things tend to be very hard to find and debug and quite annoying to people.
So the reason for reverting is because the breaking change broke something.
Yeah, and it's just I've come to be very conservative on changes that change console output.
But a revert of this would not fix that breakage because 12 is there for a long time and it is going to be an LTS, and a revert will not change 12's behavior. So I don't think that this revert actually solves anything.
Yeah, it's just been too long. This is why I'm pouring on it. And so yeah.
And I guess the thing that comes to mind is if there was a Semver miner to go back to the old behavior under a flag, that potentially could be backported to 12 and could address breakage.
Yeah.
But based on the discussion, it's like maybe we consider that if when people start adopting 12, there are problems reported.
I think at this point, there's no consensus to actually do the revert. We keep the status quo behavior as it is, and if somebody really feels strongly that they want the old behavior, then they can add an option to util format in a Semver miner.
I think we've got resolution on this. I think we can move to the other issues.
Okay. So moving on to the next issue, which is number 29327, module resolve as a self-reference. Again, Rich, you added this to the agenda.
Miles, can you take this one?
Yep. So 29327, I'll drop the link into the chat. This is part of ongoing work with export maps. Before I dig into too much, is everyone on the call familiar with export maps, or does anyone need a quick catch up on what we've been doing with that?
Quick catch up would be useful.
So as of 12.2, export maps are no longer behind their own flag. They're still flagged behind the ECMAScript modules flag. Export maps allow you to add a new field to the package JSON called exports, in which you can specify the exports of your module. This is a way of creating kind of a public/private interface for modules, so you can specify the deep imports that can be accessed by your module. If we think about something like Lodash, and you're able to do like require Lodash/fp, I'm just putting an example of that into the chat right now, to get Lodash's functional programming interfaces. Right now, as it works, is you can deep search into a module. It always starts at the root of the module, and you can kind of reach in and grab any file. When you use the export map, unless you use syntax to specifically make folders available, only the exports that are explicitly included in the export map will be available. One of the challenges to this is being able to test these interfaces. And so one of the enhancements that we've been discussing and are proposing for export maps and have consensus around in the issue is making the ability to self-reference. So you would, if you were writing Lodash, be able to do something like, I'm just typing it into the chat, require ~/fp, and that would be self-referential, referring to the exports in your own map. The tilde character today is not a valid specifier, so this is a non-breaking change. This is arguably Semver minor. Export maps will also have the ability of setting a // which would be the equivalent to main. It would shadow the main in a package, but you would be able to specify both a main and an export dot, which allows fallbacks to older versions of Node that don't support export maps. So this issue in particular primarily has consensus right now. The modules team is pro-landing it. The high-level question is which sigil to use as the specifier for self-referencing. Specifically, we're debating between @ or tilde. So it would be the difference between @/fp or tilde/fp. I'm putting those both in the chat so you can see them, or the equivalent with the import statement would be import @/fp or import tilde. So there was some objections from collaborators to using tilde because it already means something on Unix systems. So since we do generally do full paths, people were thinking that it could be confusing that that doesn't refer to the home directory of your system. There's also prior art of the tilde being used to reference home in like certain Babel and Webpack plugins. Although inside of those plugins, tilde is generally meant to refer to the root, but it can also be like kind of meta program that tilde could be, you know, a deep directory. Now, arguably the behavior that's in the ecosystem would be reproducible via export maps. It just would not be the default behavior of export maps. So the specific ask to the TSC is which sigil to use if people have a preference. Also, for what it's worth, in the time between there was a request to bring this to the TSC and now, I've worked with Jan, the maintainer of this PR, and we've made the decision for now to put this behavior behind a flag, to do some more research with the team that's doing import maps, which is a way of allowing for bare imports inside of the browser. And essentially we want to make sure that this behavior will be replicable, to make sure that like we're not creating large ecosystem divergencies. So independent of which sigil we pick today, the intent right now is to put it behind a flag. And so we could still change it at any point in the future if people are playing with it and find it to be inconsistent or confusing. So I guess the high level question would be, does anyone have a strong feeling about either of these sigils? And if not, do you want to just punt it back to the issue?
I would say I agree with all of the concerns around the tilde, about it potentially being confusing. So I would definitely not want to see that one used.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting, because like I was thinking that since there's prior community art for the tilde, that would be a pave the cow paths kind of thing a little bit. But regardless, I do think that especially for an experimental API, I think I don't think the TSC is the place to make the decision. But if the modules team can't come to agreement, then sure, let's make a decision. But I prefer to punt.
So Chalker just also put into the comment that they prefer @. So I prefer tilde, but it's not a hill I want to die on, and it's an experimental API. So are people okay with this suggestion going back? Like, as long as this goes behind a flag, the TSC does not have an extremely strong opinion. Other people from the TSC, multiple people from the TSC have voiced a preference for @. For what it's worth, myself and Mateo, I think both like tilde. So I think perhaps based on this, and it looks like Rich does too. So perhaps, and yeah, @'s already used in package names, so there's also confusion there. Perhaps what the real request is like revisiting this and thinking of some other potential sigils, because it seems like neither, like the TSC is similarly torn between the two. Does that seem reasonable to folks?
I think so. I think this is exactly the kind of thing that we have modules working group for.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I would say,
what was that?
I said not a working group. I've been watching a lot of The Good Place. Sorry.
We've had people on for the FS module who have talked about the potential of adding tilde to actually point to home directory, and I really just think that it would end up being confusing if at some point down the future, in the future, FS read tilde whatever ended up coming up with something different than require tilde whatever.
Sorry, am I interrupting? If not, I can. If I am, I will defer. So, as far as I know, tilde is being used by shells like Bash and C shell and so forth to replace with $home, right? Now, is Node.js a scripting language in the sense that you write scripts the way you would write Bash scripts, right? Or is our sort of sphere of action different from shell scripts, right? Because if it is, then given that given our roots of trying to bring people over from the website of things, they might not be familiar with tilde as being the home directory. So obviously there's a lot of Unix folks doing work with Node now. So yeah, I can see that contention, but tilde doesn't necessarily have such a strong standing, right? And we don't have an instance where tilde is being replaced by $home like it is in Bash, right? So and on the other hand, tilde being the home of this particular module does also make an amount of sense, right? But now I'm not strong on either one. I'm just saying this is this might be an aspect we might want to consider. You know.
I think that was, Gabriel, to your point exactly, the tilde being the home of the module was absolutely the reason why it was landed on as a symbol. It has prior symbolic meaning to people and would likely be easy from an educational perspective. Although I also understand that it's like, it breaks expectation if you expect tilde/thing to resolve to your home directory. Another thing that had been suggested was just literally using the name of the module itself as self-reference, but that was pushed back against because it was like a refactoring hazard. Anyways, I think that at this point, to Rich's point, I've drafted something. The suggestion from the TSC is to land this PR, that if this PR lands behind a flag, allowing more times. The suggestion from the TSC is to land this PR behind a flag to allow more time to work out semantics. There were strong opinions regarding both existing sigil suggestions, but overall sentiment was that this is something for the modules team to work out, not for the TSC to decide. And if we want to come up with more suggestions and ask the TSC for advice or to chime in the future, we absolutely can. But you know, it's something for the people working on this to kind of work through and reach consensus on. Does that seem reasonable to folks?
Yeah.
Yes.
There's another modules thing on the agenda, right?
Yeah, I would love to get to that next if we could.
Michael, if you're talking, you're muted.
Oh yeah, sorry. I had one quick question, but if it's gonna dot slash doesn't work, I don't want to. But if there's a long answer to that, let's just move on.
Dot slash already is used for relative module loading.
Yeah. Okay. 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 Let's move on to the next issue then. So the next issue is 25789. build ongoing list of actions for Python 3 compatibility.
Michael,
Sam.
Hey, Michael, can we move to the other modules? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Miles.
Yeah, I was about to say the same thing because it's time sensitive.
Sure. Just before we do that, Sam, is there anything? Is that going to take a little while to update, or is there anything to actually cover?
There's no huge updates on Python. It takes me less time to update. The fast update is NPM has landed. It's got a new version of Node.js. We've got some Travis Green builds. Looks like we can land some stuff. If we're lucky, we might even be working with Python 3 right now, but I haven't had enough time to check since NPM landed. So that's everything there is to say about Python 3. It's tootling along, and let's go back to modules.
Okay. Okay, thanks. So the next issue, I guess, is that the 371 you want to jump to?
Yes.
Divergent specifier hazard. Okay, so let's move on to 371. Who wants to take that one?
I'll take it. So there's a couple different things that are going on here. This is also tied closely to the unflagging of modules. So at a high level, a number of people from the modules team feel like we're ready to unflag modules in Node 13. It would remain experimental. It would remain flagged in 12 for now. We would begin to gather ecosystem feedback on the implementation in 13. We would backport and keep the implementation in 12 up to date. And then essentially at the point that we feel it is rather stable, we would backport the removing of the flag to 12. The hope would be that this could be in like a 3 to 6 month timeline. Now, there are individuals in the team who do not feel that we are ready to unflag yet. Specifically, there's the case of dual mode modules. So this is specifically being able to publish a package to NPM and being able to require the package and import the package with the package name specifier and have it work in both module systems. There is strong disagreement about whether or not this is a feature that should ever be enabled. Specifically, it introduces a hazard. That's what this issue is about, the divergent specifier hazard issue. With the way in which the cache works in CommonJS and ESM, if you import a module, it ends up in an ESM cache. If you require a module, it ends up in a CommonJS cache. If you import a CommonJS module, it gets created in the CommonJS cache and then reflected into the ESM cache. So ESM is always aware of what's happening in CommonJS because CommonJS is synchronous and it's able to like kind of always know that the state of that cache is what it is when things are running. The CommonJS cache, on the other hand, has no idea of what's going on in the ESM cache. So the hazard that exists here is that if you have a large graph and you import a module such as React and you get the ESM implementation of it, and then later somewhere in your graph, someone requires React and gets the CommonJS version of it, you're going to have two different instances of the singleton in the graph, and there'll be no way for the consumer of that second singleton to know that they've gotten a second singleton, which then puts the onus on module authors essentially to protect against this. Now, this is a hazard that we've already seen exist in our ecosystem, especially when packages are not deduped in very large graphs. It's arguably an anti-pattern to be relying on these singletons to begin with, but we did see in early implementations of Node prior to 12, where we had the specifier resolution algorithm, people could put a main that was just index and have an index.mjs and have an index.js and get this dual mode behavior. And we saw breakages in GraphQL, we saw breakages in Webpack, and we also saw breakages in Create React App of people kind of getting bit by this hazard in ways that were unexpected. So kind of two of the high level bits that we can't really seem to agree upon. One is if we ever the first question is, should dual mode modules, the ability to both import and require something, be something that blocks us unflagging? There's individuals from the modules team who object to us unflagging until this behavior is fixed. The other question was, do folks on the TSC find that this hazard is something that Node should be protecting against? Or is it something that we should allow but document best practices around? More specifically, we do have a PR open right now called conditional exports, which would allow using the export map to create this behavior. We're debating export maps right now. It will likely land behind a flag. I'm potentially even suggesting that we land versions with like two different flags, one flag with the hazard, one flag without the hazard, so we can actually get user feedback from the ecosystem on this. Rich, to your question, flagging would not be taking it out of experimental. But the high level concern that people do have is that the second that we unflag, the behavior of the module system is going to be mass adopted. And so the biggest concern with not having the dual mode is that without dual mode, there isn't a clear path for module authors to easily upgrade from CommonJS to ESM in a non-Semver major way while still supporting their module consumers. Whereas, I'm strongly of the opinion that switching the module systems should be Semver major. I don't see that as a problem. And I think there are paths forward to module authors. It's not as good of a user experience, but I do think that we should be guarding against this hazard. So the two high-level questions to the TSC, and also, if you have any more clarifying questions, I'm happy to ask, would be, do people feel as strongly about this hazard as I do? Because if I'm the only one in the TSC, then perhaps, I should reevaluate. But then the second one would be, does anyone have a problem with us unflagging without this kind of dual mode approach for people? So hand it off to y'all.
Miles, when you mentioned the issues that you observed with some modules that were similar to this, do you have links for those, or are those recorded somewhere?
Yeah, I can drop links in here. And these are just like some of the ones that I was able to find with some quick research. I am under the impression that there are more.
Thanks.
Rich, to your question on time frame, honestly, if the TSC does not have a problem with us unflagging before we've reached a solution on how we're going to handle dual mode packages, or if we will, we could unflag as soon as like next Wednesday. Otherwise, we're probably looking at, at minimum another couple weeks while we kind of bike shed on something that honestly, we have been talking about and disagreeing upon for months now.
When you talk about unflagging, is that, if you say next Wednesday, that's for 14?
We want to remove the flag in 13.1.
Okay.
It's a non-Semver major change.
Right.
So there's no urgency with it, but we don't want to delay it forever.
Yeah, so I guess like the high level, like the question, and this is almost more for module authors, it's like, do you consider the implementation incomplete without this behavior?
What was the answer to Rich's question, whether it remains experimental?
It will absolutely remain experimental.
Okay.
I mean, I feel like I would need to like take time I haven't taken to carefully review this to actually have an informed opinion. And I suspect that there's a lot of other people. I saw Michael nodding. A lot of other people.
I agree.
A lot of other people on this call would probably feel the same way. Yeah. So
I guess a high level question would be, and to be honest, this was something that I did discuss with the team. Chalker, to those issues being resolved, it's because we removed the hazard in 12 and they dropped support for the behavior. I guess, like, are people going to take the time to get ramped up, or do you just defer to the team? One of the things that I did, kind of try to persuade the team about was, hey, we are the experts in this. And if we defer to the TSC, they might likely just punt it back if they don't have time to ramp up.
Or make a less informed decision than the
Right.
team would make.
Yeah, I'd be happy to spend some time one-to-one with anyone, kind of going over this more in depth if that would be helpful. Does anyone have any opinions right now?
I mean,
my inclination is to, I'm not, this is not a deeply informed opinion, but it seems like, resolving differently ESM versus common, the singleton seems like something that is acceptable to me. But obviously it's not acceptable to you. So I would absolutely take you up on the one-to-one session to hash that out.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my only thought was along the same lines, except that it should be consistent. So, like, if you're going to get a different one sometimes, you should always get a different one.
Yeah.
Right? Like that might be okay, because then you don't have you don't know what's going to happen. But I don't know if that's a reasonable answer to just say, sorry, every time. It probably invalidates something about the caching in the first place, right? But the unpredictable behavior is, at least anyway, again, is that I'd be like, well, we don't want unpredictable. That doesn't, generally that's a problem.
It seems to me like a couple people are interested in maybe spending some time on this. I see Sam has written a comment. Rich, it seems like you have some degree of opinion. Michael, you've mentioned something. Would you all maybe be willing to come and attend next week's modules team meeting, and maybe I can get you up to date on things between now and then? And I guess we're at time now, but am I maybe getting the sentiment that, like, we want to have some closure on this before making a decision or before removing the flag?
I'd say, since we're out of time, why don't you send out an email and see who says yes, they're interested in participating.
Is this issue the only thing preventing us from unflagging it?
At the moment, it is the only thing that we don't have consensus on preventing unflagging.
Okay.
Go ahead, Sam.
I was just gonna say, I'd be absolutely willing to attend a working group meeting and get up to speed with what's going on with this.
Cool. So I'll send an email to the TSC list with the time for next week's meeting. And then I'll make myself available between now and then to kind of get people ramped up on stuff if they have questions.
Okay. Fine, and we'll answer questions.
I guess one thing just to add really quick to this, to Sam's comment about fracture, this is completely separate from the ability to import common JS modules. We support that 100% right now. It also would not introduce the ability to require ESM modules. It would make a single specifier load 2 different modules, and that's the hazard. And there are solutions that can work that are less, the developer experience isn't as good. I'll try to maybe put together a little bit of a write-up that summarizes this as well.
Sounds good. Okay, so we are at time. There's a couple more issues. Collaborator Summit Montreal 2019. I think Matteo had that on the agenda for awareness, and I think we covered that in the announcements. I don't think we still have Matteo. Anybody else have any context on that one?
No, yeah, Matteo ended up having a drop. He had to take care of something.
Okay, and then the other one is transfer Jenkins CI tool, tap to Node.js.org. Sam, I know you were involved in there. Is there anything you need from the TSC urgently on that one?
It's not urgent. It's completely stalled. There's an upgraded one with a better license, but it's not working or not passing tests. So somebody who has the energy has to figure that out. The easy thing still remains, well, I mean, easy from my perspective, just to ask the Node Foundation to bless our current code.
Okay, so this is on the agenda to, it's a GPL license.
Yeah.
And before we go to the board asking for an exception, we'd want to have consensus in the TSC level that that's what we want to do.
Yeah, let's push it to the next meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, Christian's coming back from Uzbekistan today, and he might have a chance to look at it and make it all work. Okay. And then.
Okay, so let's say push to the next meeting.
Sorry, before we break, just because we didn't really get any finish on that, does anybody like explicitly block us or have concerns with us removing the flag right now, or is it specifically that people want more context before making a decision?
That
I think is the equivalent to we should not remove the flag yet.
Yeah, I think like for me personally, I need to look at it more before making that decision. I am concerned about removing the flag prematurely because this is something that as soon as we remove that, people will start using it, whether experimental or not, right? And then after that, they change a lot more breaking, even while it's still experimental. So I think I would rather be conservative on it.
Okay.
And in terms of unflagging, that's still Semver minor, right? So
it is, I guess, like
okay.
The high level concern is we continuously punt on this.
Sure.
We don't have consensus on this, then this could put us in an indefinite holding pattern.
I just want to understand if it was tied to the releases at all, which the answer seems to be no. Okay, I will skip the strategic initiatives since we're at time. Is there anything else that people believe we need to discuss this week before closing out?
I will just I just want to on quick, just as a heads up for folks, in order to that the project is progressing, but in order to get it to work, I had to backport the boring SSL quick APIs that are still a work in progress, that are being backported to OpenSSL 3. That I had to backport it further to our version of OpenSSL 1.1.1. So it's a backport of a backport of a backport, I think. It's going to end up meaning that Quick will only work in the statically linked version of OpenSSL that we have. That we ship. It won't work with like the shared OpenSSL option, and there's patches we'd have to float until we're able to move up to a version of OpenSSL 3 that actually has those APIs landed. it works. There are some concerns there, and if anybody is concerned about the approach we're having to take on there, please reach out and come talk to me.
I guess floating patch, like it's how substantial a set of floating patches is potentially.
It does not. One good thing is the change. It's the patches do not change any of the existing functionality. You have to explicitly enable the quick support in order for it for those patches to impact. So there's no.
I guess that and how much maintenance, like how much harder is it going to be to do OpenSSL updates?
It shouldn't be. Most of the changes are fairly isolated into their own files, and then where they do touch existing files, it's very minimal.
Does anyone know the timeline for OpenSSL 3 when we will be able to upgrade?
That as soon as I get to the point where I've opened the PR, I'm going to start looking at seeing when we can do that. But OpenSSL 3, it's not even, I don't even think it's supposed to be released until sometime next year.
It's also this important. It's unlike all of the OpenSSL releases we've seen for the last years. OpenSSL 3 is explicitly binary incompatible. It's not ABI compatible, though they are shooting for API compatible, which means that it would be a Semver major for us, so we can't dump it into a 12.x release.
Right. I guess I wonder the urgency on quick versus having it being in a later release.
Yeah, well, the quick is going to be experimental for a while. It's going to be sitting there as experimental. It won't land in Node without the configure time flag. So you actually have to, turn on use experimental quick while you configure, so you can get it in there. So it'll be like that for probably at least through 13.
Because I guess then it comes down to just is it going to cause a lot of extra grief for the maintenance, and if not, I guess it's less concerning.
Okay. So I don't want to rabbit hole on it too much here. I just wanted to make folks aware of it. So if you do have the concerns, we do have the quick repo. We can talk about it there.
Okay. Any other things people like to bring up before we close out for today? No? Okay. Well, thanks for everybody for taking the time and for sticking around a few extra minutes. Talk to everybody next week.
Bye.
Talk to you later. Bye. Bye.